It all began on a warm, sunny morning in early summer when Amanda Johnson decided to take her daughter, Lily, on a weekend getaway. They had been living a quiet, peaceful life in Pine Ridge, a small town that seemed far removed from the fast pace of the city. Amanda was a single mother who had dedicated her life to raising her daughter, ensuring she had a stable and happy childhood. They had their routines, and although Amanda worked long hours at a local store, her life had been content, albeit without much excitement. Recently, Amanda had reconnected with her ex-boyfriend Tom. They had not spoken in years after their messy breakup. Tom had always been a free spirit, someone who was unpredictable and often difficult to rely on. Their relationship had been full of ups and downs, and in the end, it was Tom's erratic behavior that led Amanda to walk away. But now, years later, something had changed. Tom had reached out to her, apologizing for the past and expressing a desire to reconnect. He told her he had turned a new leaf, that he was different now, and that he wanted to be part of Lily's life. Amanda had mixed feelings about the idea. She was hesitant to bring Tom back into their lives, especially around Lily. Her daughter had no memories of Tom, and Amanda didn't want to expose her to someone who might cause more harm than good. But Tom was persistent. He promised that this time things would be different, that he was stable now, and that he wanted to make amends for the mistakes of his past. After much deliberation, Amanda agreed. She felt that perhaps they could use this trip to find closure, to see if there was any potential for a more peaceful relationship. It would be a chance for Lily to get to know her father and for Amanda to see if Tom had truly changed. Tom suggested a weekend trip to a secluded cabin in the woods, away from the distractions of everyday life. The cabin was located in a remote area, surrounded by thick forest, far from the town's bustle. It seemed like the perfect place to unwind, relax, and spend time together. Amanda hesitated at first. She wasn't sure if spending time alone with Tom in such an isolated place was the best idea, but she didn't want to seem overly cautious. Perhaps this trip would help them move forward. The day before they left, Amanda packed everything she thought they might need: clothes, food, and of course, Lily's favorite toys and books. She double-checked the bag to make sure nothing was left behind. Lily, excited by the idea of the trip, chattered non-stop as they loaded into the car the next morning. It was a long drive, but Tom kept the mood light, sharing stories from the past and telling jokes to make Lily laugh. It was hard to ignore the strange sensation that had settled in Amanda's chest, but she tried to push it away. Perhaps she was just overthinking things. As they drove further away from town, the landscape began to change. The roads became winding and narrow, the trees thicker and denser. Amanda felt the quietness of the woods around them, the isolation that came with being so far from civilization. She glanced over at Tom, noticing the slight tension in his expression. He was quieter now, his eyes focused on the road ahead. Amanda tried to shake the feeling of unease, telling herself that it was just her nerves getting the best of her. By the time they arrived at the cabin, the sun had begun to set, casting a golden hue over the surrounding trees. The cabin itself was charming, rustic, and isolated, exactly what they needed, or so Amanda thought. The evening started off well. They made dinner together, laughing and talking. Lily seemed to enjoy the time with her father, and for a moment Amanda allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this trip would be the beginning of something good. But as the night grew darker and the wind howled through the trees, Amanda's unease returned. Tom seemed different, somehow more distant, more intense. He wasn't as talkative as he had been earlier, and there was something about the way he looked at Amanda that made her feel uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. But she dismissed it, thinking it was just her imagination. After all, this was supposed to be a peaceful weekend. What could go wrong? The evening began with an easygoing atmosphere, the kind of setting where one would expect to unwind and enjoy the company of loved ones. Amanda, Tom, and Lily sat around the cabin's rustic dining table, the flickering light of a few candles casting soft shadows against the wooden walls. They shared a homemade dinner: pasta, salad, and a few of Lily's favorite snacks and the sounds of laughter and casual conversation filled the room. For a while, everything felt normal, even pleasant. Lily, who had been shy at first, seemed to be warming up to Tom. She asked him about his childhood, and he answered with gentle humor, trying to bridge the gap between them. Amanda couldn't help but feel a brief sense of relief. Perhaps this trip wasn't going to be as awkward as she had feared. Tom, though different from the man she had known years ago, appeared calm and collected, trying hard to make things work. The tension that had plagued Amanda's mind earlier seemed to ebb away. Lily's laughter was a welcome sound, and for a fleeting moment, Amanda allowed herself to imagine that maybe they could all be a family again, if only for this one weekend. After dinner, they moved into the living room, where a cozy fire crackled in the hearth. Amanda curled up on one of the worn sofas, and Lily sat beside her playing with a toy. Tom, for his part, seemed content just to watch the flames, lost in thought. As the hours wore on, the conversation grew quieter, less spontaneous. The evening had a sense of stillness that was both calming and unsettling. Around 9 p.m., Amanda excused herself to step outside. The night air was cool, and she relished the weight of the forest, the way the wind whispered through the trees. For a moment, she could almost forget about the nagging doubts that lingered in her mind. The cabin, with its old-world charm, seemed like the perfect escape from the pressures of everyday life. But as she stood there, looking out at the vast, dark woods, a strange feeling crept over her, feeling of being watched, of being alone in a way that felt unnerving. She turned to head back inside, but stopped short when she noticed something odd. The door to the cabin, which she had left slightly ajar, was now firmly shut. She hadn't heard Tom close it, and there was no sound of footsteps behind her. Hesitantly, Amanda reached for the handle and gave it a tug. It wouldn't open. Her breath caught in her throat. A sense of dread swept through her, but she pushed it down, thinking it was just a mistake. Maybe Tom had locked the door when he went to the bathroom or to get more wood for the fire. She knocked softly at first, then more urgently, but there was no response. Her heart began to pound in her chest. Her thoughts raced. Why had he locked the door behind her? She couldn't remember the last time she had seen Tom. Had he been acting differently earlier? Or was it just her imagination? Minutes passed, and still there was no answer. Amanda stepped back, trying to assess the situation logically. It was possible that Tom was just distracted or didn't realize she had stepped outside. She had no reason to suspect anything sinister, but the unease she had felt earlier in the night was now creeping back stronger than before. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open from the inside, and Tom stood there, his face expressionless. He didn't offer an explanation or ask if she was okay. He simply stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Amanda, trying to mask her growing sense of discomfort, gave him a tight smile and brushed past him. Inside, the room was dim, and the fire had burned down to a few embers. Lily was asleep on the couch, and Tom had settled back into his seat, gazing at the dying flames. Amanda took a moment to study him, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the situation. Something about the way he was sitting there, so still and unblinking, struck her as strange. Was it just the isolation of the cabin getting to her, or was there something more to his behavior? The rest of the night passed in a quiet, unsettling silence. Tom hardly spoke, and Amanda found herself unable to sleep, lying awake in the dark, listening to the wind outside and the soft crackling of the fire. The nagging feeling that had been building in her chest only grew stronger. She couldn't shake the sense that something was off, that Tom's sudden detachment wasn't just a passing phase. It felt more like a mask, a carefully constructed persona to hide something darker underneath. As the night stretched on, Amanda couldn't help but wonder if this weekend was going to end the way she feared, not as a chance for reconciliation, but as a turning point in a nightmare she had only just begun to understand. The following morning began like any other, with the quiet serenity of the cabin seeming to mask the tension that lingered in Amanda's mind. The sunlight streamed through the small windows, casting long shadows on the wooden floors. Amanda woke to the sound of birds chirping outside and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. For a moment she almost forgot about the strange events of the previous night, the sense of unease that had gripped her. But as she got out of bed and wandered into the living room, something was amiss. Tom was nowhere to be found. His backpack, which he had brought with him, was absent from the corner where it had been left the night before. Lily, still in her pajamas, was playing with her dolls on the floor, oblivious to the quiet tension that was building in the air. Amanda's heart skipped a beat as she glanced around the cabin, trying to make sense of the situation. Tom wasn't outside either. There was no sign of him anywhere. Panic slowly crept into Amanda's thoughts. She called out for him, her voice growing more anxious with each passing second. There was no answer. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what could have happened. Had Tom gone for a walk? Surely he would have told her if he were leaving. Why hadn't he woken her up or said anything? Her eyes darted toward the front door. It was locked, just as it had been the night before. There was no way out unless someone had left and locked it behind them. But that didn't make sense. Why would Tom lock her out and then leave without a word? With her stomach tightening, Amanda took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm. She checked the cabin thoroughly, walking from room to room, calling Tom's name. The cabin was eerily silent. There were no signs of a struggle, nothing to suggest anything had gone wrong. Still, the lack of any explanation, the absence of Tom, only deepened the dread growing inside her. The only logical explanation was that he had left, but why hadn't he told her? Why hadn't he said goodbye? The isolation of the place made everything feel more surreal. Amanda glanced at Lily, who was still absorbed in her game, as though nothing had changed. She tried to keep her composure for her daughter's sake, but the knots in her stomach only tightened. Amanda decided to wait, thinking perhaps Tom had just gone out for a short walk or some time alone. But the minutes turned to hours, and there was still no sign of him. She couldn't ignore the growing fear that something wasn't right. With every passing hour, she felt the weight of the situation press down harder. Was this some sort of sick joke? Why would Tom leave without a word, without even a note? Around noon, Amanda decided to take matters into her own hands. She grabbed her phone, but as she checked for service, she was reminded that the area had no signal. Panic began to rise in her chest. She needed to get out, needed to know where Tom was, but she felt trapped in the woods, with no way to communicate with the outside world. She packed a small bag with essentials, water, snacks, and a few of Lily's belongings. She had to find Tom, had to get answers. But before she could leave, she realized something else. The car was still parked outside, exactly where they had left it the night before. If Tom had planned to leave, surely he would have driven away, wouldn't he? Amanda walked over to the car, her mind racing. She opened the door, checking the interior. There was nothing unusual at first glance. But as she opened the glove compartment, her stomach lurched. There, tucked neatly inside, was Tom's wallet. The sense of dread that had been building in her chest reached a new height. If he had left in a hurry, why would he leave something so important behind? Everything pointed to the fact that Tom had simply disappeared. At that moment, Amanda realized that she wasn't just waiting for Tom to return. She was searching for answers to a mystery that she wasn't sure she was prepared to face. The fear that had been gnawing at her from the beginning was now undeniable. Something was terribly wrong. With Lily by her side, Amanda decided she couldn't stay any longer. She couldn't keep waiting in the dark, hoping for a resolution that might never come. With the last of her courage, she locked the cabin door behind her, keeping her eyes peeled for any sign of Tom, any clue to explain his sudden disappearance. But the only thing that seemed certain now was the crushing reality. Tom was gone, and something had happened, something Amanda wasn't ready to face. Months passed, and Amanda's life became a daily struggle to find answers. The quiet of Pine Ridge, once a comfort, now seemed like a cage. She couldn't move on from the haunting question that plagued her every waking moment. Where was Lily? Where was Tom? Despite the authorities' lack of urgency and the slow progression of the investigation, Amanda never stopped searching. Every day felt like an eternity. She combed through the woods around the cabin, following every lead, no matter how small. There were no sightings, no signs that Lily or Tom had been anywhere near the town or its outskirts. The police, though sympathetic, had run out of ideas. The case had gone cold, and with no evidence of foul play, they had no choice but to classify it as a missing persons case. Yet Amanda refused to accept that her daughter had simply vanished into thin air. She couldn't shake the feeling that Tom knew more than he was letting on, that his disappearance was part of something much darker. She knew he had a troubled past, a history of unstable relationships and brushes with the law. But this was different. This wasn't just about him disappearing, this was about a mother losing her child, a child who had no choice in the matter. Amanda refused to let go, to believe the nightmare was over. Then, just as hope was beginning to fade, a break came in the form of an anonymous tip. It was a late evening when Amanda received a phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted, unrecognizable. The person, however, claimed to have information about Tom and Lily, information that could lead to answers. They gave her coordinates to a remote location deep in the mountains, far away from Pine Ridge. With her heart pounding in her chest, Amanda immediately contacted the local authorities, but by the time they gathered a search team, the trail had grown cold again. It was a frustrating, soul-crushing reminder that time was slipping away. Determined not to let the tip slip through her fingers, Amanda set out alone. The drive to the location was long and treacherous, the narrow, winding roads growing steeper as she ventured further into the wilderness. Her car bumped and swayed as it climbed through the rocky terrain, the tension building with every passing mile. By the time she reached the spot marked by the coordinates, it was nearly dusk, and the fading light made the area feel even more isolated, more eerie. The forest around her was thick, the trees looming like silent sentinels in the dimming light. Amanda got out of the car and started to walk through the woods, her heart pounding as she navigated through the underbrush. The place felt wrong, and with every step she took, her anxiety grew. She had no idea what to expect. Was this a trap? Had someone been playing with her, leading her into the wilderness to trap her in the same way they had trapped Tom and Lily? Suddenly, as she moved further into the dense woods, her eyes caught a flash of movement in the distance. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment she thought she had seen Tom, but it was just a shadow. The world around her seemed to hold its breath. Amanda pressed on, but the trail led to nothing more than an old, crumbling shack. The structure was hidden deep in the woods, its weathered wood almost blending into the forest itself. There were no signs of life, no sounds coming from inside. Feeling her heart in her throat, Amanda approached the shack cautiously. She hesitated before stepping inside, the door creaking as it opened. The air was thick with dust, and the interior was dark, save for the faint light filtering through cracks in the walls. But there was something about the place that felt wrong. A chill ran down her spine as she scanned the room. In the corner there was a pile of old belongings, clothes, bags, and items that seemed out of place. A piece of clothing caught her eye, and she froze. It was Lily's favorite jacket. Tears welled in Amanda's eyes as she reached for it, her hands trembling. The realization hit her like a freight train. Lily had been here. Tom had brought her here. But why? Where was she now? Was she still alive? The jacket was all the proof Amanda needed to know that Tom hadn't abandoned them. But what had happened? Why hadn't he taken Lily with him? As the questions raced through her mind, a voice echoed through the trees behind her. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Amanda's breath caught in her throat. It was Tom, but he wasn't alone. A man stood beside him, someone Amanda didn't recognize. Tom's eyes were cold, his expression unreadable. In that moment, Amanda understood. Tom hadn't just disappeared. He had been hiding, keeping secrets that were darker than anything she could have imagined. And the worst part was, her search for Lily was far from over.